So I'm going to just start the recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Torah and Tea class number 5 out of our 6-week series. So we're going to do this week and next week, and then we'll just switch topics and keep on going, I think. Why stop? We'll or continue topics. We'll take a vote whether everyone wants to, go into Tanya in depth or just have a completely different topic. Okay. So I'm just going to...
Dina, which of the handouts are we going to be reading?
I'll share it with you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I shared on the screen. I sent out in an email. I sent out 3 of the handouts, not the 4th. So last class I didn't post yet and send it out. And then maybe I'll do that after this one. I'll send out all 5 handouts. But I'll just bring it up on the screen so that you don't have to do that. Okay, so actually just before I share the screen, I'll just kind of give a little bit of a recap where we're at, right? We're doing the overview of Tanya in 6 classes. So we discussed we're the first 34 chapters of the Tanya. That's what we've covered so far. Isn't it amazing what you can cover in 5 classes, 34 chapters. So the first class, right, we talked about the fact that we have a dual nature, the godly soul and the animal soul, and how that works. In the second class, we talked about how we can control ourselves. The third class, we talked about bringing our feelings into harmony with our behaviors. And last class, we talked about maintaining a positive, joyful attitude, right? Even while we're doing all of the above, while we're like that's necessary in order to constantly be able to fight the good fight and all of that. So it seems then that we would have everything we need to know then, right? Each time it's like, okay, so then what else is there? What else is there? We get to like unpack the next level of like, what else do we need to know to continue, right, in our divine service? What's the problem? So no matter how hard we work as a Beinoni to be Beinonim, right, the struggle is never going to disappear. Never. And even if we can perfectly control our thoughts and perfectly control our actions and our behaviors and all of that, our speech, right, we're never going to be free from that internal conflict. So what we're left is like, that could feel super like defeating. Like, what's the point, right? Like, what is the point if I'm always going to be in conflict? This is always going to happen, right? Like, what is the point of the constant struggle? Okay. So my husband and I both like coffee, but I would have to say he is a regular coffee drinker. Okay. Rabbi Landa will have probably like 3 cups of coffee a day. I like coffee as, I just enjoy it. Like, I didn't happen to have coffee today. It's not like I must have it every day. I usually have it either when I'm just like, oh, I'm in the mood of a nice cup of coffee, or if I'm super, super, super tired and I'm like, well, maybe a cup of coffee will help. But right. So imagine that we're out of coffee one morning and he comes into the kitchen and, he was like all ready. He gets up really early to learn with people. So he's up at 5:30 and he comes in, and let's just say I was up with him, which that isn't usually the case, but I'm in the kitchen. He comes in, he's like all ready for his steaming hot cup of coffee. And we're out of coffee. And he is so upset and so frustrated and so disappointed. And he's like, telling me like, oh my gosh, I was waiting for that coffee. I need coffee. I can't start my day without coffee. I can't believe we're out of coffee. What am I going to do? Right? Like a whole thing. And I, as a loving wife, I'm like, I totally get it. Yeah, I know. Like, cause I know what it's like to be out of coffee and I like coffee. And I'm like, yeah, that's really hard. That's so frustrating. You totally expected to have coffee and there's no coffee here. Right. And I'm just like really empathizing with him. And let's just say, this is all hypothetical. That Hadassah overheard the conversation. She does not drink coffee. She doesn't care about coffee. It means nothing to her, but she overheard the conversation, ran to Harvest Market down the street, got some coffee, and came back and was like, here, I bought you some coffee. Who do you think would have helped the situation more? Me, who understands and was empathizing and was like, I totally get it, or Hadassah, who totally didn't get it, but came back with the coffee?
Hadassah.
Yeah. Right? So here's what's so fascinating. It's like, yeah, maybe I helped him feel understood and heard, and, that takes away a little bit of the pain of no coffee because he's like, hey, someone gets it. But Hadassah, who doesn't get it, it doesn't matter. She actually fulfilled the desire, right? The desire for coffee, the lack of coffee. She actually went and got the coffee. So ultimately, she solved the problem, even if she didn't get it and it made no sense to her. Okay. Right. So where am I going with this? Right. So if you, let's say, take the Benini and the Tzaddik, right? The Tzaddik, we said, they don't have the conflict. Their desires are God's desires. They want what God wants. They're in line. They're on board. The Benini has a lot of conflict. The Benini has an animal soul. The Benini is like, I do not get this, God. I do not know why you want this. This doesn't make sense to me, right? So the Tzaddik and the Benini, in their like their understanding and their like that level is different. But on the behavior line, they're technically the same. The Benini, again, always does what God wants in their thought, speech, and action, which again isn't meant to make us think like, okay, forget it, then I can never be a Benini. It means that we actually are capable of that. And we can just focus on the next thing, the next moment, the next opportunity, right? In that moment, we can be a Benini. So the tzaddik and the Benini only are different in their insides, but their behavior is the same. And ultimately, that is what matters the most. Does it matter that Hadassah didn't understand Rabbi Landa's desire for coffee and why it's such a big deal that he wakes up early and there's none left? No, but she got him coffee and his desire was met, finished, right? So what's really interesting is there's a lot of other mystical traditions, I think, that really value enlightenment. And Judaism actually does not prize enlightenment. Contemplation, meditation, that's not what I'm talking about. Contemplation, meditation, 100%. But enlightenment is not the supreme religious experience. It's not about all the feelings that come with it. And I'm not putting that down. It's super, like, right? There's definitely a place for that. But for sure, the action is the main thing. Doing the mitzvah, right? It's kind of like if somebody was like, the shofar, hearing the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, and they're like, you know what? I just feel so elated when I hear the shofar, and I just love it. And this year, I'm gonna just do my Rosh Hashanah in August, and I'm just gonna blow the shofar, and I'm gonna feel all the amazing feelings. I'm gonna do my atonement or whatever, my connection with God for Rosh Hashanah, August 3rd, right? They're doing this whole beautiful spiritual experience, blowing the shofar, versus, let's just say, somebody who hears the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah and feels nothing. They're like, I guess this is supposed to move me towards, coming closer to God, but mostly I'm just hearing a ram's horn and it's making noises and it's not really affecting me, right? Who's accomplishing the goal?
Both?
There is
No?
zero mitzvah to blow a shofar on August 3rd. Zero. They're accomplishing something very self-satisfying to that person, nothing to do with their relationship with God. Because there is no mitzvah to blow a shofar on August 3rd. I just made up that date. I guess I don't think Rosh Hashanah could ever fall on that date. We also blow the shofar 30 days. It's more of that's a custom as a preparation to Rosh Hashanah. So if those 30 days are August 3rd, then it could be a good idea to blow the shofar then. But the point is that at the end of the day, the action is the main thing. Doing the mitzvah is the main thing. The person that is not, and it doesn't mean let's not get that person that's listening to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Let's see how we can get their emotions in line. Let's see how we can have that also be a spiritually gratifying experience. But even if it isn't, they are fulfilling the mitzvah and they are connecting with God. They are doing what God wants. They are bringing him coffee. Okay. So it's not it's not a subjective experience of what, and again, you are all welcome to unmute yourselves and argue and do any of that you want, because I welcome dialogue. But God has a will and a desire, and God's wisdom is Torah. God's will and desire are the mitzvot in the Torah. That is what God has requested. So if we want to relate to God, then it's relating to God in the way he wants. And when we do a mitzvah, that is total bonding with God, complete and total bonding with God. When you light your Shabbat candles, when you give money to charity, when you eat something that's kosher, when you respect your parents or your elders, when you learn Torah, whatever it is, right? There's so many opportunities. Each one of those, every time you're actually doing a mitzvah, you are in complete and total bonding with God. Right?
Now, if the goal is not enlightenment, or there's not an end goal or something we're reaching, why, this is really a simple question, but then what are the mitzvot reaching for? What is the end game, if there is one, or the concept of an end game? Does that even apply?
Yeah, there's absolutely an end game. I think that's exactly what this class is. That's exactly what we're talking about. Should I answer it now, or should we just see, like, keep that question in our minds, go through this class and see if it answers it?
All right. All right. What do you think, ladies? Should she answer now, or should we wait, be in suspense?
The Rebbitzin said, wait.
There you
I
go.
wait, I could answer it now, but I actually I hope that the material of this class is exactly that, the answer to that question.
All right. We'll give that to you.
Okay. Okay. So number one, the first step in solving this existential crisis of the Beinoni, that's like, hello, what is the point of all this work if I am always going to struggle and I'm never going to achieve the level of a tzaddik, right? Is the first step in that is recognizing that our most powerful connection to God is not through thoughts and feelings, but through our actions. Okay? That is the most powerful connection we could possibly have with God. And then taking that deeper, we connect to God through our actions by surrendering ourselves, right? Almost taking ourselves out of the picture to do what God wants of us. It's a dichotomy because, of course, we're in the picture. God wants a relationship with us, which means we're also an us. But in order to really engage in that relationship, sometimes we have to take the us out of it, the me out of it, in order to actually do what God wants, right? So it's definitely a dichotomy there. But that's really what God wants, a total bonding with you as an individual. Okay?
But if the guy who hears the shofar on Rosh Hashanah feels nothing, how is that a connection?
Because you're doing what God wants. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. By
Even
mere
if it
fact that you
goes
hear
in one and out the other. Okay.
So is that one of those mitzvot that's the one that's just because?
No.
Oh, that's not a just because?
No.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. No, it's not even one of those. But I'm saying with all of the mitzvot. So here's what's fascinating about the mitzvot, right? There are the just because ones. Like they don't make sense logically. They don't make sense in a rational human mind, right? So like mikvah, kosher, wearing wool and linen in the same garment together, right? Then there's the ones that are like remembrances to remember something, right? Like Shabbat, Passover, right? And then there's those are like testimonies, and then there's civil laws, which we would say maybe you and I would come up with without a Torah. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, say the truth, like that kind of stuff. We're actually supposed to do all of the mitzvot like the category that we don't understand. Not the other way around. Not let's do them all in a way that they make sense to us. It's even though I personally would like choose on my own to not kill, because of course, why would you kill? It's not my life to take. It's not, I don't get to do it. Whatever, all the rational reasons. The only reason that we don't kill is because God told us not to. And the reason for that, like the reason that it's so important to do all the mitzvot, also only because God said to, even if we have a alternative reason that we can wrap our brains around, is because it is so easy for the human brain to rationalize itself. Because like if we're doing it because I'm like, yeah, of course it makes sense not to kill. How many people have rationalized killing? They can make it make sense, but that has nothing to do with it. It's not about whether it makes sense or not. It's about whether God wants it. What if God says in this scenario, kill? And I'm like, no, I'm never going to kill. And God says, no, in this scenario, in self-defense, like whatever, right? In self-defense, you are required to save your own life. You don't just say like, not going to kill anyone. Come get me. Whatever. I don't know. Like, right? Like all of it has to relate back to this is how God says it should be and wants it to be and created it to be. Make sense? Okay. So when we shift that focus, right? When we shift from the idea that we need enlightenment and it's all about my own personal spiritual condition or my own personal understanding, my own personal like feeling within everything I do in the universe, right? And we shift into like, no, it's about my action, and my action has a physical effect on this world. My action makes this world a better place. So kind of going back to what like, Andrea, you're like, if you have if you're just literally shofar sound in, out means nothing, but that action actually refines the world. Like if you want the end game is in short, didn't quite get up to it yet, but I was like, we'll wait for the class, and now I'll just say the end game is like this: God, there's God, and then God had a desire to create a world that was very low and dark, with physicality, physical humans, struggle, all that stuff. And then I'm going to create this, and I want them, through their struggle, through their connecting with me, through the mitzvot, through all my desires, to then turn this dark, lowly world into like this beautiful haven where I feel at home, to bring us back to out of the dark and the lowly, right? To the times of Mashiach. That's in essence, right? That is I mean, if you really want a two-liner, like, it's so great. I tell this to my, some of the things I learned with Bat Mitzvah girls is like these 12 verses, like 12 foundational verses in Judaism. I actually did a women's class on the 12 verses, a women's series. And whenever I get up to the verse that says like, here's the purpose of the world, I'm like, I just want you to know, like, this is so amazing. There are people that spend their lives searching for the purpose, right? Or they don't search for the purpose, but then at the end of their life, they're like, wait a second, what am I doing here? What's happening, right? And then we start questioning. I was like, you are not even 12 yet. You're sitting right down in front of me, and I'm going to give it to you in 2 lines. You don't have to search for it. You get it right now. So great. It's one of the verses, right? V'zeh kol ha'adam v'tachlit briaso. This is the reason for the entire purpose. Oh, wait, v'zeh kol ha'adam v'tachlit briaso. Yeah, this is the reason for the purpose of humanity and all of creation. Literally, that's how the verse starts. Is that called Imtachlis Breso? Oh, right. Uvrias kala olamos, and the creation of all the worlds, anything that ever exists. Lihios lo yisparech dira zu betachtonim. To make for God a dira, which is a dwelling. In Israel, a dira usually refers to your apartment, right? But a dira is a dwelling, a home, an apartment, a dwelling for God. That's it. That is our job. We make this world a home for God. Do you know where God feels comfortable? God feels comfortable when in a world where Jewish women and girls light Shabbat candles. God feels comfortable in a world where we give 10% of our income to charity. God feels comfortable in a world where children respect their parents. And here's how, right? Like, I'm obviously simplifying all of this, right? But just the idea that every single time we actually in action do one of those things, we make this world a home for God. And when this world is refined and homey enough, right, for God, we've arrived at the ultimate, which is Mashiach, the times of Mashiach, where God's like, all right, all of that, completed all that work. The entire reason I created the world, now it's completed, and now we live in this new era of the time of Mashiach, where it's not going to be dark and low and concealment of godliness and all the challenges that come along with that. Does that make sense? Okay.
It does, but what do we need Moshiach for at that, if we got to that point on our own? We've made the world so great.
Mashiach is like the result of that work, so to speak, but that is actually God's ultimate desire. Like, he didn't ultimately create a world to stay in this state. He's like, I'm going to create this for you to bring it to this state by making it this a home for me. Like, where do you think God, like, this kind of can go back, by the way, to that existential question of like, how could God do these terrible things? There's another verse, Imo Anochi Batzara, God is with us in our pain. Now, this does get confusing because we are very limited human beings, and we're trying to understand God here. God is in pain with all of our pain. God's not sitting there like, I know exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. God's like, no, I don't want this either. So ultimately, God created this world to then have us connect to God and make this world into a home for God, which results in back to this like other state of being where it's not dark and lonely with war and hunger and challenges and all of that.
Can you explain when you said God is with us in our pain? Does that mean God is feeling pain, or God is helping us in that situation in which we feel pain?
It's hard to, it's like, we have to always, whenever we talk about God, like approach it with understanding that we are using human terms to try to understand something so godly and something so great in us, right? So, because what I want to say is God is feeling our pain. God is in pain with us. Like it's painful for God. But then that also is like, well, who caused that pain? Only God can cause anything. So God is causing his own pain because he chooses to. So you could also choose not to, right? That's where it kind of gets tricky. But it's like God is in pain every single time that there is suffering and tragedy. Like that's not the ultimate of what God wants. It's really hard. It's hard to use human language to describe it because it also doesn't make sense the way we use human language to describe it. But of course, that's what we have to do because we need to understand God. But I would say like God is in pain by choice.
If our godly soul is part of God, then he should be in pain.
Yeah.
But eventually it breaks down. Analogies break down eventually.
Okay. So, okay, so right, so this takes us back to this idea that the true purpose of what we can do in this world is the action. So even if we are always going to be that struggling vanity, that's totally fine. That's not the ultimate anyways to not struggle. So, okay. So the Alter Rebbe, brings up this question, right? That the Beinoni would have, right? Which is like, what is the point if I'm always going to be struggling? What is the point if I'm never going to attain the level of tzaddik, if this is always going to be my reality? And the Alter Rebbe explains that, right? That perfecting what you do, perfecting your outsides it's not just like, oh, since you can't reach the level of a tzaddik, like here's what you can do. That is the goal. The goal is the action that we take. So the service of a Beinoni is not inferior to the service of a tzaddik. Because in terms of the end game, they can both accomplish it the same way, right? They're both still fulfilling the purpose of creation the exact same way, which is through the actions we take. Okay? So here, I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So now we're going, right? So I started off this class with giving you the little rundown of the first 34 chapters that we discussed in the first 4 classes, right? And now we're going into chapters 35 to 40, right? So now we're talking about action. Chapter 35 talks about action is the main thing. Chapter 36 is talking about a dwelling place in the lower realms. That's how this world is referred to, the lower realm, and God having a dwelling place here. Chapter 37, the process of perfecting the world. And then we're going to go into intent. Okay? Action and then intent. Intent, chapter 38 about body and soul. The chapter 39 is the levels of intent. And chapter 40, we talk about wings. I'll explain that as well. Okay. So here, right here, let's see. Nancy, do you want to read text number 1 for us?
Sure. Let us understand the purpose of the creation of Beinoni and their souls' descent into the world, since they will not be able to eradicate the animal soul throughout their lives, but only ensure that its garments do not invest themselves in their bodies. If so, why have their souls descended into this world to labor in vain, to wage war throughout their lives against this nature which they cannot vanquish?
Okay. Thank you. So this is like the question, right? The question where it's like, what is the point if I can't even get rid of my animal soul? Like, is all my labor in vain, right? And the Alter Rebbe answers it with this metaphor right over here, this metaphor of the oil lamp, right? This table 1, right? So the Alter Rebbe explains how if you are going to light a candle, or right, like I'm thinking of like our menorah that we light an oil menorah on Hanukkah, right? So there's the oil, there's the wick, and then there's the actual flame in order for the candle to burn, right? If there was no oil, there was no fuel, the wick can't create a flame. And if there is no wick, the oil can't create a flame, right? So the flame is the result of the oil and the wick. Okay? So it's same thing over here, right? In order for light to be produced, we have to have all 3. So the wick is the human body. That's the vehicle that we have to perform God's will. Our bodies is that vehicle. But again, the wick alone without fuel can't, the human can't sustain any light. So what is the fuel? The fuel is the oil, is the mitzvot. The mitzvot that we do using our human body is what creates the flame, and the flame is the godly light. Okay. So how we seek to transform the physical world into godly light, how do we make this world a home for God, is through the fuel of mitzvot. That is what creates the transformation from a physical object into a spiritual, using it for something holy, using it for God to be able to rest in it, right? And the tzaddik is the same way. The tzaddik also has to use physicality, right? Like a lot of times, and this is something that, Chabad Hasidus like really emphasizes, but a lot of times, and definitely in other religions, right? It's like this concept where like spirituality is about removing yourself from physicality, right? Like, let's not talk. Let's go on I don't know what that's called, right? Like if I don't talk, then you're like more in tune with the spiritual. Or if you seclude yourself, if you're on a mountaintop, if you go away from, human interaction, like that idea. And that idea is actually very foreign to Judaism. That no, the exact opposite. We engage in the physical world. You talk. You don't not talk to achieve your holiness. You talk. You don't seclude yourself. You don't go to a mountaintop. You don't, right? Like you engage in the physical world. You use all physical objects for the manifestation of godliness, to elevate towards holiness. Like that is how we go about doing it, right? So text number 2. Let's see, Barbara, do you want to read that for us?
Sure. Text number 2, Tanya. But let this be the consolation to the Beinoni. To quote the Zohar, the body of man is a wick, and the light which shines on a man's head needs oil, meaning good deeds. The light of God's presence is compared to the flame of a lamp, which does not shine nor cling to the wick without oil. Likewise, the light of God's presence does not rest on a man's body, which is likened to a wick, without good deeds as fuel. Makes so much sense. It is not sufficient that his soul should act for him as oil for the wick, because the soul of a person, even of a perfect tzaddik, does not completely dissolve itself out of existence so as to be truly nullified and absorbed into the light of God to the extent of becoming one and the same absolutely. Rather, the person remains an entity apart, which feels awe for God and loves him. It is different, however, with the commandments and good deeds. The vitality that is within them is in no way a separate, independent thing, but is united and absorbed within his blessed will, and they become truly one in a perfect union. Amen.
Yeah. So, right. So now we have like, how is it that action is so essential, and what exactly does action do that creates this reality, right? This reality where we're transforming the physical. So, right. So we said, so everything in the world really breaks up into 3 categories. Look, if you even look over here, this little table, right? There is kedusha on one side, which is holiness. This thing is inherently holy. And then there is on the other side, what we're going to call, well, sitra achra means the other side. Literally, that's what it means. Or unholiness, or klipa. Klipa literally means a shell because it covers up holiness, right? It's a covering. So there's kedusha on one side, which is holiness. There's sitra achra, which is unholiness. And then there's this middle zone, which is neutral non-holiness, klipat noga. But what I'm really going to say it's all it is not holy yet. And that is the majority of the world. There's some things that are kedusha, some things that are sitra achra. The majority of the world is klipat noga. The majority of the world is not holy yet with the potential to become holy. So for example, right now I'm sitting at my desk. Every single thing that is in front of me right now, just double checking, every single thing that's in front of me right now falls under klipat noga. It is all neutral, non-holiness, not holy yet, except maybe I'm great, but like, and becoming holy as we speak, or like over and over, right? Like this, how many times have I used this microphone to teach Torah, and the video camera that's looking at me, and the laptop, right? And my phone, right? This is a perfect example of neutral non-holiness, because the people ask all the time, are phones good or bad? Is the internet good or bad? We're like, it's all about how you use it, right? The internet is, it's called pariv, right? That's like the term when you say like there's meat, dairy, and pariv. It's like neutral. It's like, how are you using it? Do you know how much amazing, like, look at Zoom. We're using Zoom to learn Torah together. That's called elevating a digital platform, right? Like, it just anything, my earpiece, my sunglasses, my, like, that's what I'm just saying. I could pick up everything on my desk. All of it is klipat noga. All of it is neutral non-holiness with the potential to become holy. All of it is just not holy yet, or I've made it holy, because how many times do, you know, like, so it just, what it basically is like, when God created the world, there was a, this is now getting very Kabbalistic, but there was a shvirat hakelim, like a shattering of vessels. Okay, so it was almost like godly sparks shattering everywhere. And into all the physicality, parts of godly sparks fell. That did not make sense. In all of physicality, there is a spark of godliness that is like trapped, so to speak. Okay, so it's a trapped piece of godliness, and our job is to elevate the sparks. Our job is to release the godly spark inside every piece of physicality, right? Untrap it. So how do we untrap it is exactly that, by using it for a godly purpose, using it for a mitzvah, using it for something holy. So like this microphone that I got from bnh.com, right, was like literally created by the manufacturers and waiting around for someone to buy it and teach Torah into it so that I could redeem the spark that was inside of it. Done, right? On to the next thing. It's so fun. Like when we go on hikes with our kids, sometimes we'll go to like a new hike that we've never been on before, and we'll be like, guys, this is our first time to say the 12 verses, right? Like to say words of Torah here. Like probably no one ever walked here saying words of Torah. This piece of earth was like waiting for us to walk here and have a chance. And it's like this very exciting thing that we do sometimes with our kids, versus like the experience when I was with Menachem in Israel, and we were like, he's like, we're walking on like ground that David probably walked on. Like like, you can even do specific tours where you actually know. And he's like everywhere we went, he was just like so excited. Like, Joshua stepped here and Abraham was here, like it was so exciting. Right. Versus like we could go on a random new hike in Marin County. And we're like, we're probably the first people to say Torah on this trail. So anyways, that's the idea, is that our job in this world is literally in this category of klipat noga to redeem sparks in all the physicality that we come in contact with. Okay. And that's exactly what we do with every single time we engage in this world. We're taking something physical and elevating the mundane stuff to a level of actual holiness, right? And this idea is so comforting for the Beinoni, because a Beinoni has the exact same capabilities of doing this essential role, literally the purpose of creation, as a tzaddik. There is nothing that the tzaddik is equipped with that the Beinoni isn't, in order to fulfill the purpose in creation. Okay, so.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So you made the comment that, when you go walking on a trail, you'll say Torah. So if any of us like that idea, even if we're not walking with other Jews, say we're walking with non-Jewish people, we could say the Shema to ourselves, right?
100%. Totally.
And that would be like our own way of saying something from the Torah.
Yes.
And from the prayer book, the Siddur, that is helpful. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
To expand. Okay.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with who you're with or what's going on around you or anything. We all have this opportunity all of the time.
And Nancy, that's what you say to get yourself in focus. The Shema.
You're saying that's what you say to get yourself in focus.
I think that's what Nancy.
No, that's what Barbara
said. During Menachem's earlier class,
yeah,
I was saying that when my mind falls down from holy prayer, I often just use the one sentence of the Shema to recenter myself, to pay attention, so that I can then pray without stray thoughts.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's so beautiful. So yeah, I mean, this is like you could be sitting in the waiting room waiting for your dentist appointment, and then you pull out a Torah book, or not even. You can listen to a Jewish podcast. You can listen to Rabbi Landa's podcast on the Torah portion. You could, right? You could go on to jewishnavara.com and go in the search bar, or there's like tons of learning opportunities, or Chabad.org. That's what I'm saying. Like the opportunity is always and everywhere and endless, right? One of the 12 verses is a piece of the Shema, talking about the Shema, which is Vishinantam livanecha. You should teach it to your children. Vidibarta bam, and you should speak about them meaning words of Torah. So you should teach Torah to your children, and you should speak about words of Torah. When? B'shiftecha b'veisacha, when you sit in your house. Uvelechtecha v'derech, when you go on your way. Uveshachbecha, when you lay down to go to sleep. Uvkumecha, and when you get up. So I always say to my students, when should we speak about Torah? When is this verse telling us? They're like, all the time? I'm like, yes, Torah is not the I'm going to wait for when I go on Saturday to synagogue, not in COVID, to hear the Torah portion, or I'm going to wait till I don't know, go for my yearly Yom Kippur or whatever, or I'm going to like it's like part of our life all the time. It can come up in normal conversation in the car. It's just like part of us, who we are all of the time, right?
Adina,
Yes.
wouldn't you say too that it is, of course, talking, but also doing the mitzvot? In other words, trying to apply what you're talking about. Because you can talk, like
Yeah.
talk about the empathy with the coffee, or you can just go get the cup of coffee. So
Yes.
where, is that implied?
Yeah.
That
So this is what I love. Like one of the things like in the Rebbe's talks, right? So it would come to like Hanukkah and the Rebbe would say like, here is why Hanukkah is the most important special holiday and all the lessons. And then it would be Pesach and the Rebbe's like, here's why Pesach is the most important special holiday and all the lessons, like every time. So the Tanya does the same thing. It goes into all these chapters. Here is why Torah study is essential. You must learn Torah because without Torah learning, how do you even know to do the mitzvah? And when you're learning Torah, you're connecting with God's like wisdom, God's will, like God's brain, so to speak. And then it has all these chapters here are why mitzvot are way more important than Torah study. Because if you just right, like, and it's like, well, which one is it? It's both. We just love, that's why I told you, I think in a different class, my favorite word is and. It's not a very exciting word. And yet I'm like, it's both, right? Of course, if we're only steeped in Torah study and it never leads to action, what's the point? It has its own little point that learning Torah is its own mitzvah. So you're doing one mitzvah and you're connecting to God. Like it is special. But if it doesn't have a mitzvah with it, right? And if you're only doing mitzvah, you actually can't even know how to do the mitzvah without Torah study. Plus, it's not necessary. And the learning Torah and learning about God is also what gets the mitzvah in line, right? The mitzvah could be hearing the shofar. The Torah learning could be understanding what is going on in the world when you're hearing the shofar. So that when you are hearing it, you also are having a spiritual experience and not just fulfilling the mitzvah, right? Because we really do want both. I'm not saying that, we should just hear the shofar and it means nothing to us, or light Shabbat candles and it means nothing to us. I'm saying, of course, we want both. But if you don't have the kavana, which is the intent we're going to get to, the mitzvah is still performed. So, yes, to answer your questions, both.
Thank you. And the college words for that are theory and praxis. So the Torah is the theory and the mitzvot are the praxis, the things
Yes.
you're doing in life. That's it.
There you go. And we need absolutely both. Okay, so text number 3. Let's see, Jolie, do you want to read that for us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. In order to draw the light of God's presence over his body, he needs to fulfill commandments, which are performed by the body itself. Thereby, the very energy of the body itself, which is engaged in this action, is absorbed and united with God in a perfect union. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then here is where we get up to the point that you wanted to get to at the beginning, Jolie. Text number 4, which is exactly the purpose of all of it. Why are we doing any of this? It is a well-known saying of our sages that the purpose of the creation of this world is that God yearned to have a home in the lower worlds. That is the entire point of creation. If you want one sentence, make this home a world for God. Make this world a home for God. Make this world a home for God. That is the one sentence of the entire purpose of creation and every single thing inside of it. What will be the result when each of those individual actions, oh, this thing I made a home for God, and this thing, and this thing, and in this area, and this, and this, and this, and this, right? And not even outside of ourselves, even ourselves. We need to make ourselves into mini homes for God, right? What is the result when all of that is achieved? The times of Mashiach, right? So the Beinoni is essential in this, right? We're not any lower than a tzaddik or like, oh, okay, here's what you could do. It's not like that's not even the point. It's like you want the point of creation, you have every single thing in your toolkit that the tzaddik was granted as well, right? So, and I think we kind of spoke about that a lot. Okay. Ultimate purpose. So now text number 5. Well, yeah, a lot of this we kind of just weave in over and over. But repetition is good. Okay, Vivian, do you want to read text number 5?
The ultimate perfection of this world, which will exist in the Messianic era and the time of the resurrection of the dead, meaning the revelation of the infinite light in this physical world, is dependent on our actions and service throughout the period of exile. For it is the mitzvah itself that generates its own reward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of this, all of creation, and all of this, it's all based on God's desire, right? So I told you why the world was like, what the whole purpose of the world is. The Zohar actually asks, like, why did God want this? And then the answer is, you can't. Oh no, why am I getting confused here? The Zohar, it says, right, that God desired a home in the lowest worlds, and then in the Tanya it says, either in the Zohar or the Tanya, it says, why did God want this? And the answer, like, you can't ask questions on a desire, right? Like, if you just think of like an urge, like a craving, if you think about a craving and someone's like, well, why are you craving that? It's like, I just am. Like, that's what I'm craving right now, right? I think I use this example all the time that when I was pregnant with Hadassah, I had really bad cravings for hot peppers. And there was one Friday night in Crown Heights in Brooklyn after our Friday night meal that we literally went door knocking to ask people if they had hot peppers because I wanted them so badly. So, right. So it's like, why on earth did I want that? No idea. It was just a craving, right? So God craves this. God craved a lower world where we are created and we make a home for God. Okay. But it's
Can
all
I ask one
based.
more quick? Can I ask one more quick question? I'm sorry. This line, for it is the mitzvah itself that generates its own reward. That is a very amorphous kind of a statement. And I'm just wondering if at some point during our talk today, not right now, I don't want to interrupt the lesson, but if maybe we could each share what that means to get a concrete feeling of what that experience is, because it just seems like a holy kind of a thing that's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. So I would just love to hear some concrete examples from other people in the group.
Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot, it says, schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself.
Yeah, but okay. I mean, I'm
idea,
not
right. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I'm not denying that feeling, but I would just love to hear from the group.
No, I think that's a fantastic question. Like, yeah, what does that mean that it's, like, because sometimes it's like, what do I get? Do I get long life? Do I get something in the world to come? Like, what is the purpose of me doing the mitzvah? Just the mitzvah itself. Like, what am I getting? Like, that's not a reward. Do you want to share anything on that?
I don't know who is speaking and asking that question.
Oh, that was Jolie. It was Jolie.
But Jolie, a way to explain this is I'm on the Tahara committee for Kol Shofar, which is a conservative shul in Tiburon. And by washing a dead met, a person, this is something that the person cannot do for themselves. They're no longer here. And we wash them and we wash their hair and we clean their nails and dress them and put them in the coffin. This is not a reward that we get in any way, but it's an internal reward. That's the best way I can describe a mitzvah generating its own reward.
Well, sometimes you can feel the reward of the mitzvah. Like for me, when I light the candles for the Sabbath, I immediately feel just a change, which I can't really describe that well, but suddenly the outside world seems to melt away a little bit and I feel much calmer and connected. So maybe that's an example of it being its own reward.
I think in terms of every time we do something good or right, we build goodness and rightness into ourselves. Just we make ourselves better.
And the mitzvot itself are paths to God. So it's a connection. Reward is partly in the connection.
That sometimes we feel like not so great before doing a mitzvah about doing it, but then after we do it, there's a good feeling that comes. And I've also heard that often the reward isn't anything that we feel while we're here on earth, but it's supposed to accumulate into rewards in the afterlife.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay. We can continue discussing that because I do think that that is like a super fascinating
Yeah,
discussion.
thank you guys. That's
Okay.
cool.
So, do you want to share anything on that, Julie?
I just think that selfishly, when I feel low, and if I am driven to do something kind for somebody, I feel like I'm replacing the low feeling with a high feeling, and that's kind of selfish. But it makes other people feel great, and it makes me feel great, and it's just the simplest thing, And I find I really do kind of connected back to Torah teachings. I connected back to Judaism, to the style of Judaism, just doing nice stuff for the heck of it.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a little wacky sometimes, but because it's just out of context, like bringing somebody a gift or saying something nice or helping someone out. I don't feel like a do-gooder. I just feel better.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you. So it's really interesting, right? So we're going back to this idea that so the mitzvah is God's desire, okay? God desires mitzvahs. Now, therefore, anything that exists because God desires it to therefore be used for a mitzvah. Which then you could say, well, does God desire evil? And the answer is yes, God desires evil, but not for the sake of evil, but for the sake of the purpose that then we take evil and transform it to good. We can use something negative and turn it to positive. So for example, a cow exists, right? So that there could be tefillin. Tefillin exists so that Jewish boys over the age of 13 can put on tefillin, right? So the cow and the tefillin are not the purpose of God's desire. The purpose of God's desire is that Jew when he's putting on tefillin. And these things exist so that those things can happen. Okay? So, and then the result of that is that then once that thing is used for a mitzvah, it's like no longer hiding the godliness that is inside of it. It is now becomes elevated. Well, so while we're still in Gullus, in exile, like before Mashiach's times, we don't necessarily see it, right? So I can use my phone for a mitzvah, but it still looks like a phone to me. I don't see clearly the spirituality in it. But when Mashiach comes, we will. That's going to be actually the biggest difference about pre-Mashiach times and post-Mashiach times is the ability to see the inherent godliness that is in every single thing. Any questions on that before we go to text 6? Okay. Text number 6. Let's see. Andrea, do you want to read that for us?
Sure. By performing a mitzvah, the person draws the revelation of the blessed infinite light from above downwards. To be clothed in the physicality of this world in an object which had heretofore been under the dominion of non-holiness. For example, the parchment of the tefillin, mezuzah, and Torah scroll. Similarly, an etrog, which is not orla,
Mm-hmm.
the forbidden fruit of a tree's first 3 harvests, or money given to charity that has not been acquired through theft, and the like. Now that one fulfills God's commandment and will with these objects, the vitality within them ascends and is dissolved and absorbed into the blessed infinite light, which is his will that is expressed in the mitzvot. For in a mitzvah, there is something,
There is
nothing whatsoever to hide his light.
right. Exactly. And then let me just take that to text number 7 before I discuss that a little bit more. Let's see, Robin, do you want to read that?
Sure. Similarly, the power of the vitalizing animal soul clothed in the bodily limbs of a person who performs a mitzvah clothes itself in the deed of the mitzvah, and it ascends from non-holiness to be absorbed into the holiness of the mitzvah. Even in the case of such speech-related mitzvot as Torah study, reciting the Shema, prayers, and the like, although they do not involve actual physical action, yet one does not fulfill the duty of Torah study, prayer, etc., unless he actually utters the words with his lips.
Okay, so now what we're doing, we're saying, okay, if the whole purpose is for us to take physicality and turn it into spirituality, and that most of the world falls into this neutral non-holiness, this not yet holy category, that we can have an effect on it. Now we're taking it a step further. It's not just physical objects, right? It's also our energy. Okay, so this is like, we're kind of like stepping into like Jewish sustainability and renewable resources concept, right? Where now we're like, the energy that you put into going to work, right? So in other words, there's the money you get, and then you give some of that, 10% of that to charity. That is, you're using the money, like the money itself is now elevated to holiness, right? But then there's like, well, what about all the work, like my physical labor that went into me doing the work to get the money, right? And everything that was involved in that, whatever resources right? So all of that is elevated as well. Your energy. There's also your food and your drink and your other, like all of these resources are being used, right? So like, in other words, think about what I had to eat in order to have the energy to go to work, to do the work, to make the money, to then be able to give the charity, right? Like think about in that process, how many things are elevated. Think about, again, even to fill in, we're like, okay, there's a cow, the cow's hide is used for parchment or whatever, right? But but then there's the ink to have it written, and then there's the feather, and then there's the table that it's being written on, and then there's the energy of the person, the sofer who's writing it, and the food he had to eat to have the energy to write it. Like we're talking, and then the plane that it went on to get shipped to the store to get, right? Like we're talking about just like this world like converging in terms of like resources of what it takes to get this mitzvah accomplished. I think it's fascinating to think about. Okay, so a mitzvah elevates the physical object, the energy, the food, and all the resources that it took to have that mitzvah be accomplished. All of that is elevated in the one mitzvah. Like that's powerful. You can even just think about you could think about that when you light Shabbat candles on Friday, right? Like, okay, you're doing a mitzvah if you're lighting the Shabbat candles, right? It's pretty simple. You can take literally any candle, right, and light it and make a blessing 18 minutes before sunset. You did a mitzvah, but think about what is happening because of that. Like this candle, this match, the energy, the food and drink that I consumed today, the whole manufacturing process for the candle. Like, I don't know, like there's just so much in it that we don't even realize is getting elevated just because I took the time to do this one mitzvah that God wanted in the world. But all of that is literally fulfilling the purpose of the entire creation of the world. And I personally think that's enough to just blow my mind every single time I would do a mitzvah, right? Like that it's not this like small little nothing action, right? When we say like one small action can change the whole world or one small deed can tip the scale, I'm like, think about how much is affected within one small deed. So powerful. Okay. Let's go to text number 8. Let's see. Did you, hold on a second. Rita, do you want to read that for us?
Sure. The energy invested into the performance of mitzvot involving action derives its vitality from all the food and drink that one has eaten and drunk. These were under the dominion of non-holiness, but when the person performs a mitzvah with the energy derived from this food and drink, this non-holiness is transformed. Thereby all of the realm of neutral non-holiness, which constitutes the vitality of the physical world as a whole, will ascend as well.
As well. Yeah. So here again, it's like this now extends to the air we breathe, right? The sleep that you use to refresh yourself in order to do a mitzvah. Like this is where I was saying where there could literally like the difference between a nap, like taking a nap in the middle of the day, let's just say, or it doesn't even matter, even going to sleep at night. The difference between a sleep that is purely indulgent, which just means like I have nothing better to do, I'll just sleep, versus like just literally the thought of like I'm going to use my energy to go do something good, right? Like I'll like I literally just have a thought every time I take a nap in the middle of the day. I'm like, well, I'm going to be a really present, loving mom for my kids, right? And it completely transforms the way I nap. The same thing is happening obviously, but it's like it's not just like I have nothing better to do, I'm just going to nap. It's like literally for a purpose. So like the air we breathe, the energy, the sleep we have, the clothes we wear, the work that we do, the physical objects, like all of that is like coming together in like imagine just like these expanding circle, like ripple effects, right? Like this, it's like the ripple effects of what we do when we do a mitzvah, all for the purpose of like literally bringing this world's entire purpose to fruition. Compound that by the amount of people working to make this world a better place, working to make this world a home for God. And it's like, we're all like in this together, creating the reality of what God wants in the world. In order to, again, have the ultimate end result, which would be Mashiach, right? A world that is described over and over by our prophets of what we're working to achieve. Right here in text number 9. I'll read, let's see. Let's keep going. Let's see, Adrian, do you want to read text number 9 for us?
Sure. The area of Mashiach and of the resurrection, namely the time of revelation of God's glory and divinity in the world, and the banishment of the spirit of impurity from the earth, is entirely dependent on our drawing down his godliness through the performance of the mitzvot. Each soul is related to the vitality of a proportionate fraction of the entire world, and this portion of the world depends on that vital soul for its elevation by means of his partaking of the world for the requirements of his body and vital soul in the service of God. For example, eating, drinking, and the like, one's dwelling and all his possessions.
Okay. And Sandy, do you want to read text number 10 for us?
Yes. For this is man's entire purpose, the purpose for which he was created and for which his soul descended to this world, so that God may have an abode precisely in the lowest realms, to turn the darkness of this world into light, so that God's glory will fill the entire physical world and all flesh will see godliness together.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is like literally here. This is our purpose, right? Imagine you, like if you were, if you were going to be an astronaut and fly to the moon, right? Like imagine you're like, okay, if I want to do, a mitzvah on the moon, right? What would I have to take with me? And what are all the things I would have to take with me in order to do mitzvahs on the moon? And then what are all the things I would have to take in order to do those mitzvahs? Like, right? Like, it's just like the amount, like, that's how you can imagine the ripple effect. If you're like, wait, in order to do this, I have to bring this, I have to get a this, I have to get a this, right? Like, and you have all that with you, right? That's how you can like imagine just here in this world, the ripple effects of what it would take, of what happens, how much goes into even just one mitzvah being performed. Okay.
Adina,
Yes.
I never appreciated the thought of running to do a mitzvah until this very moment. Thank you so very much.
You are so very welcome. And I can't even tell you how happy that what you just said makes me. And you know what? Even just the way you said it back to me was so good, because we say run to do a mitzvah. We use it in all of our teachings with little kids, right? As adults, we're not like run to do a mitzvah. Like we talk about it. We have a book called Zrizos, which is like It's the Hebrew for like to do something fast, right? It's about doing the mitzvah fast. And we talk about it with our kids, and run to do a mitzvah is like in children's songs, right? But as adults, we don't really say run to do a mitzvah. But when you really think about it, of course I would be running to do mitzvahs all the time, right? If you like really think into it deeply of like, what does it actually mean to do a mitzvah and what's actually being accomplished in the world when I do a mitzvah? Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
It makes me think that maybe there's God's purpose in our doing a mitzvah in considering how interconnected we are. For example, lighting Shabbat candles and being dependent on the person who made the candles and who bought the candles and who sold the candles and what is involved. It's just us doing the mitzvah. It's the history of the mitzvah that connects us all in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. So now that we spoke so much about the mitzvah, you could think, okay, clearly our feelings and our emotions don't matter. It's just about doing the mitzvah. And here's where we get to the and part. Wrong. Right? So yes, action is the main thing. And it's super important. And that's what it takes to transform the world. But the reason that kavana, and kavana is like intention, the reason that kavana, intention, is important is for the same reason that action is important. Okay? So when a mitzvah is done with feeling, the feelings of love and awe of God, which by the way, love and awe of God are each a mitzvah. It's not like and it's a nice thing to have love and awe of God. It is actually a mitzvah to have love of God and awe of God. They're their own mitzvahs themselves, right? The mitzvah is so much more intensified when there is love and awe in the mix, right? So of course, yes, you're fulfilling the mitzvah when the shofar sound goes in one ear, out the other. And think about how much greater the mitzvah is, how much more special the mitzvah is when it also has all of your emotion wrapped up in it. Again, you're still fulfilling the mitzvah, right? Like when without all the intention, but think about how much greater it is with the intention, right? So it's kind of like customer service. If you can imagine, like, I think I'm very passionate about customer service, and that customer service needs to be good, right? So there's somebody who could actually do what you asked them to do in customer service. And then there's someone who did what you asked them to do, but like was so much, like they were so nice about it. And they were so kind about it. And there was so much like of them in it. So yes, the thing got done either way. You got the good customer service, but one of them feels a lot better. Like if you would do a survey, right? You know, like that you get these surveys like, did we solve your problem? Right? So that's like very easy, yes or no. Like the problem was solved or it wasn't solved. But then there's like, I don't know if you get the customer service ones where you also like rate like how, about the person that was helping you. So like, yeah, the problem, so it could be like, yes, the problem being solved on both of them, but like one of them, like the person that helped you was just so great about it, patient and kind and friendly and all that at the same time, versus the other one, like, yes, problem was solved, but I didn't get like the other stuff that goes with it, right? So one is just a much better experience. So attitude without action action without let's take this back. Attitude without action is not useful. Why don't you think about that, right? If I ask my daughter, can you please go clean your room? And she's like, sure, mom, I'd be so happy to do it. And she doesn't do it. I really don't care that she was so happy about my request, right? I'm like, the room had to get cleaned. So attitude without action, not useful. Action without attitude, still useful, way more enjoyable, way better experience when it has the good attitude that goes with it, right? So that is the Alter Rebbe and Tanya now compares, it talks about a mitzvah. So a mitzvah with kavana is like a body and a soul, right? So it's like it's like the two together enmeshed. That's what really is like so powerful. And then now we kind of like went through how powerful action is on its own, regardless of anything else. And now the Alter Rebbe goes into, and now let's talk about how important, how special, and how great it is when we layer all of the intent and the kavana on top of that. Okay. So that gets us to text number 11. Naomi, do you want to read that for us?
Nevertheless, it has been said that prayer of any other blessing said without kavana is like a soulless body.
Thank you. Okay, right. So So like the kavana, right? The intent is, if that's not, it's like you got the container, you got the body for the thing, but not all the beauty that goes into it, not all of that part. Okay. So then what is the kavana? What does that consist of? What does the intent look like? The love and the awe. So text number 12, this explains clearly why awe and love are figuratively called wings. Hold on, gotta just move it. The wings of a bird are not its main components. Its life does not depend on them at all. Rather, the main parts are its head and the rest of its body. The wings merely serve the head and body, enabling them to fly. Likewise, with Torah and mitzvot, they constitute the essential supernal union by the revelation of supernal will, which they cause. Awe and love merely elevate the Torah and mitzvot to a place where this will, the blessed infinite light, and this unity can be revealed. So in other words, awe and love, the emotions that we put into our mitzvah, the intention that we put into our mitzvah makes our mitzvah fly. That's what it takes for it to like truly be able to soar and like reach its fullest potential, right? A bird that doesn't flap its wings and doesn't use its wings is still a bird, but it's just not using its fullest capacity, like what it's capable of doing, right? It's underutilized. So it's the same thing. A mitzvah done without kavana is still a mitzvah. A mitzvah done with kavana, it's used out to its fullest. All right. So now we have our summaries to end off for today. So man's microcosmic struggle towards inner perfection is mirrored in the world's macrocosmic struggle towards external perfection. That's kind of has to do with the idea of making our own selves a little mini temple. Action is central and more important than spiritual enlightenment. Thus, even the imperfect person is able to engage meaningfully in life's most important purpose. Mitzvot elevate neutral non-holiness into holiness, thereby building the godly dwelling in the lower realms, which is the purpose of our creation. The natural result of mitzvot is the transformation and elevation of the world to godliness, culminating in the perfect world described by our prophets as the endpoint of our service to God. A mitzvah elevates the animal soul as well as the food, drink, and other resources expended for its purpose. Intent, constituting the feelings of love and awe, adds energy and life to our actions and intensifies the effect of the mitzvah. A mitzvah is compared to a bird and the intent to its wings. And that takes us to the end of today. Right. Any questions?
Yes.
Why don't you introduce us to more complex issues, Adina, something a little deeper?
Say that every class, Joey. Is that your request for the next series?
No.
Okay.
I'll be digesting this one for a long time.
I give you a week. You only got a week to digest. Then we go on to the next part.
So
Isn't Tanya the greatest? This is why I love Tanya. I feel like it is so practical and relevant, and like it's like right now. How do you do the next thing?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe it's not a good question, but
No such thing.
Why did God create a low and dark realm? Why?
That is the question. That's the question that either the Zohar or the Tanya asked, and the answer is God had a desire. That's it. That's the answer. He had a desire. He had a craving.
Hot peppers.
And you cannot answer cravings. Sorry, say it again.
Just hot peppers.
Yeah, exactly. This world is to God as hot peppers were to me in my first
Maybe it's also like a painting and an artist, that there's a will to create that really can't be explained. There's really no why to it. It just exists and becomes.
Mm-hmm.
Had God created a perfect world, there wouldn't be work for us to do.
Right, but wouldn't that be great? You just get to like be born into perfection in perfect world.
Won't that happen in the time of Mashiach?
Because we worked for it.
If we got it without working, we would not appreciate it at all.
But we wouldn't even know what we were not appreciating.
It exists in contrast.
What would we have to do then, though?
We just get to advance in our goodness. Like we're gonna like learn, like advance in our relationship to God, advance in our Torah learning, advance in our, but I think like I mean, that could be its own class topic if we want to talk about the times of Mashiach. Like in a lot of ways, it sounds utopian, and in a lot of ways, it's going to be regular life. Like as far as I know, life is going to continue. Now, just imagine like regular everyday life. But imagine like what would everyday life look like if we were going through everyday life, but there is no illness, no war, no like jealousy and competition and strife and that kind of thing. And here's really the bigger part. We see godliness very clearly. We don't look at a table and only see a physical piece of wood and white paint over it. That's what I'm looking at on my desk, right? We see the divine matter in it, the fact that it is clearly a creation of God. How would that change our everyday living? But still have everyday living.
Hard to imagine because our difficulties, they draw a contrast between what's good and not so good. And to have nothing to make a contrast, it's hard to imagine where you get motivation maybe.
Right. But if we still just have our godly soul, not our animal soul, right? Then our godly soul is motivated to keep learning, to keep doing, to keep it just like that's all it wants, right? I just want to connect to God. And I just get to do that all the time now, however that looks in day-to-day living.
Heaven on earth.
Heaven on earth.
Yeah.
That's our job, bringing heaven down to earth. That's the like whatever.
I love the idea of going for a walk on a trail and saying a blessing and just creating a holy place. It just sounds good.
Yeah. It does. I recommend it.
Gonna do it.
I mean, and here's the other part. It's like we could just stop for a family picnic, right? Like it's not even like we have to like think so spiritually. And of course that's beautiful. And sometimes we do it, like let's say the 12 verses. But I'm saying we could just stop at like a clearing for a picnic. We pull out our snacks, we're making blessings on our snacks. We keep on going and we just elevated that place, right? Just by regular Jewish living, you know, which is cool too.
I like the concept of, because often it's like, why did God do this and why did God do that? And I like that recognition that you can't answer that question because it's like saying, why do you like chocolate or why do you like vanilla? Whatever you crave, whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Adina.
Thank you
the last
so
class
very
of this
much,
series.
Adina.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, as always. Thank you, Adina.
Thank you.